We are back with another weekly personal yoga training tutorial for you all. My name is Megan Tyler, and I will be breaking down plank pose for today, Dandasana, otherwise known in Sanskrit. And this is a pose that goes outside of yoga, definitely. One of those poses that we probably started getting familiar with in sports, and it was an exercise that's been around for a long time to strengthen the core. And you probably had to do planks in PE class, right? So you are probably familiar with planks. But there's so much that gets missed in your plank pose. And that's why I'm here to break this down today. Because what I see a lot of students do is they hold their plank pose in class without realizing that they are maybe compensating in certain areas because they just don't have the strength yet. And they need to modify to build up that strength, right? To not do what they're doing. And I'll point out what I see a lot that happens here in a moment when I demonstrate. But the idea is it's not shameful to take a modification in your plank, to drop those knees. You probably hear that a lot in your yoga classes when you get into a plank pose, is the option to drop the knees. Never take that as like a fail sign, right? If you have to drop your knees or feel the urge that that's what you want to do. Because there's ways when you drop the knees that you still can be mindful about your engagement into the core and into your muscles to still get the benefit to, again, build up that foundation and build up that strength so that when you try your full plank pose again, you feel stronger. There's all these modifications and places that you can build the strength for your own body and your own unique yoga journey, so that you can get there maybe one day, but it's not something that happens overnight, and everybody is different and every unique journey is going to be different. So that's why I want to break down these basics of these postures so that you can understand the importance of knowing these modifications so that you can explore your practice, get curious about where you're at day to day, and tap into your unique practice, because maybe you realize that you have to kind of put your ego aside and say, oh, I have been compensating in my plank pose. I do need to drop the knees, and I need to practice that, like setting my ego aside so I can feel okay that I'm dropping my knees and still feel good that it's enough, because it is enough. So many people, I feel like, think it's not enough when they drop the knees. Oh, I'm giving up. It's not about that. So let's get into it. That's my spiel about why it's so important to understand plank pose modifications, and why you may be afraid to try them, or the resistance you might feel when you actually go to trying them. So let's go back to the mat and I'll show you what I mean with our plank pose. So we can start from your tabletop to your plank pose by curling under the toes, lifting those knees, and the hips come in line with shoulders and heels. So you have all 10 fingers spread nice and wide, planting firmly into the mat. We're pressing down into the mat and lifting out of those shoulders so that the shoulder blades kind of spread apart just slightly. Our gaze is just slightly in front of those thumbs. And then we should feel that straight line with the shoulders, hips, and heels in one line. Glutes are slightly engaged, inner thighs are kind of squeezing towards each other. So we feel this full engagement. The biggest thing here, though, is that if you don't have the strength in the core there yet, and that's okay, this tends to happen. The hips tend to sag. And what does that do for your back? Not good things, right? That puts tension on the low back. So the hips might sag here if you don't have that strength in the core yet. And the hips might stay up here, right? When you go to shift forward, you might notice that this is as far as you can go. You might have a little tenting in the hips. So those are two key indicators that you should drop the knees, right? So if you feel the hips are back here, if you feel they're sagging down here, drop the knees. It's okay, because what we do here from dropping the knees, we bring the tops of the feet flat, and it's not like we're just dropping into a tabletop. The difference from a tabletop and a modified plank is a modified plank is shifting those hips slightly forward, right? Your tabletop, your hips are stacked over the knees. In your modified plank, you are shifting slightly forward so that you can feel some engagement happening into the core. You can still feel engagement in the glutes as you squeeze those inner thighs towards each other. And as you lean slightly forward, you're tucking that pelvis forward, right? So you're tucking that tailbone and that pelvis forward, and that's going to help engage into the core as the belly button kind of pulls in towards the spine. So this is enough. This can be totally enough. if you feel that engagement and if you're mindful about being active here, not just holding, but actually engaging those muscles, right? Because this will strengthen you in the core to eventually curl under the toes, lift the knees, and find a stronger plank pose, right? For then going into your chaturanga, right? Because that's a lot. And a lot of times students just kind of dump onto the floor because they don't have the strength there. Some things to note in your plank is if you have wrist issues, that can be kind of a restriction here. If you have wrist issues and holding your plank, whether it's your modified plank or your high plank is too much on the wrists, some options. You can come up onto fists, so you can stack your hands over those fists, and that's going to be a little bit better on the wrist because you're not having that like 90 degree by having your palm flat. You can also use weights. I grabbed some 5-pound weights here, so you can use weights in your hands so that you have a little bit of a lift as you find kind of that fist, but there's no pressure on your actual fist, right? So that's an option. Or altogether, you can take a forearm plank instead of your plank on your palms. So a forearm plank would be bringing your forearms down to the floor. You can have a fist with both hands coming together, or maybe palms flat, whichever is going to be better for you. But you're going to be stacking the shoulders over those elbows, finding those forearms planted into the mat. And then you're going to curl under the toes and lift the hips. Still finding the shoulders, hips, and heels in one line. Still strong into that core, tucking the belly button in towards the spine, pelvis forward, and those thighs engaged. But we're pressing into the elbows, pressing the forearms, trying to roll the shoulders away from the ears. And again, spread those shoulder blades apart, right? You can still drop the knees and find a modified forearm plank here. Again, tucking that pelvis forward, finding that core engagement, right? But that takes all the weight off the wrists and you're working more into the shoulders. So those are your plank modifications to try out when you go to your classes. I encourage you to try them out. Plank is such a great posture because it's really strengthening you for where you're going next into your flow. But of course, it's great for the abs, not necessarily gaining abs, but strengthening your abdominal muscles, right? Strengthening that whole torso and that core that holds you up. It helps with posture. It helps with spinal alignment. It also helps strengthen the upper body, the shoulders, the arms, and especially the wrists. It's good for stretching and strengthening into the wrist. But again, if you have wrist issues, we have those options to take that weight off the wrist. So, plank pose. I'm telling you to play around with this idea that your ego doesn't have to be in charge, and it's going to benefit you by checking in and seeing where you may be kind of just not ready for going that far, right? By like checking in and knowing where you're compensating, knowing where you're not quite activating those muscles. And by doing that, you can build that foundation, build that strength, and then come back to that ideal shape to maybe then feel, wow, stronger, more confident to hold it, to move through it, to like add it into the other postures and connect your flow with it, right? So again, this is why I'm doing this, is to understand the importance of being able to know these variations so that you can play in your practice, because each day is going to be different and your body is going to be different day to day, month to month, right? It's always fluctuating based on so many different things. So let me know what you think of this variation. Let me know if you noticed maybe some of those areas of compensation, like if you didn't realize you sagged your back or tented up the hips. Let me know. And I just would love to hear how these variations and modifications are helping you in your personal practice. And I'll be back with another one next week. We'll see you then.